Alistair Cook, arguably the first true podcaster, may have passed, but we believe he would approve of his resurrection through the auspices of AI. This weekly report is a homage to his years of dedicated broadcasting, looking at the goings-on in America.
The week just past felt like one of those October afternoons when the light slips a little quicker and one is aware of shadows edging in earlier than they used to. In the United States, the familiar hum of democracy still persists, but the machinery creaks, and the citizen senses that something is being recalibrated. Let us begin with the ever-present skeleton in the wrong, the continuing shutdown of the federal government. Since the funding gap opened on the 1st of the month, the stalemate in Congress has deepened. The Senate has failed repeatedly to advance the House's measure, and the pause in appropriations has spread beyond routine disruption into structural strain. The result, essential services curtailed, vulnerable programs under threat, workers furloughed or required to function in limbo. What is remarkable is not simply the duration, already one of the longest shutdowns in modern history, but the message it sends. It says the government can be paused. It says the apparatus we imagined always running smoothly is now subject to interruption. And in that pause, citizens see more than an economic cost. They see a shift in trust and expectation. Across town, the tone of politics itself took on more texture of contest than consensus. Nominations to key offices became flashpoints. One such nomination for an ethics-related post was withdrawn after racially offensive messages by the nominee became public. The withdrawal signaled disarray, but also the fact that accountability, once presumed solid, is now visibly negotiable. And then there were the protests, the large, synchronized demonstrations of a citizenry unsettled. In particular, the No Kings movement marched into national view. On Saturday, October 18th, thousands of marches were held across all 50 states under the banner No Kings, a declaration that in America the people, not a sovereign, should hold power. In cities from New York to San Francisco, from Chicago to Washington, D.C., citizens gathered in hundreds of localities, over 2,500 events registered, to voice concern at what they perceive as an ascendant, authoritarian impulse in the executive branch. The No Kings movement stands as a vivid symbol. Organizers described the day as a non-violent but unmistakable rebuke. No thrones, no crowns, no kings. The coalition behind it included civil liberties groups, grassroots organizations, and labor bodies, united less by party than by principle. Their message was pointed. The Constitution spells out limited government, not a king's rule. The citizen's right to assemble, to speak, to dissent is not optional. In New York City, the protest rolled through all 5 boroughs with more than 100,000 people said to have participated without a single arrest. In Washington, the National Mall filled with tens of thousands. In San Francisco, participants formed human banners and costumed themselves as the Statue of Liberty to dramatize the message. And in Chicago, a 2-mile-long route of marchers wended past Trump Tower, chanting, "Shame, shame, shame, as horns honked in solidarity. The sheer scale and synchrony of action were unusual, even unprecedented, in modern American protest history. The political overtones could not be ignored. The protests were set against a backdrop of federal deployments, aggressive immigration enforcement, use of National Guard troops in cities, and talk, whether overt or implied, of expanded executive powers. The movement's argument: when the government gestures toward power unconstrained, the people must respond. The week's social dimension turned this into something both symbolic and urgent. Part of the impatience seen in the streets then comes from what might be called the gap between rhythm and reality. The rhythm of governance, bill writing, committee hearings, negotiations, marches at its predictable pace. The reality: social anxiety, economic dislocation, identity strain, migratory flux, global pivoting, these move faster. The protests are one of the audible complaints that the system is no longer keeping tempo with human lives. In Washington, the leaders argue over budget lines, but out in the states and the neighborhoods, citizens feel the consequences: missing paychecks, delayed benefits, agencies closed for business, infrastructure investment postponed. A federal worker asked, "Can we rely on this?" The answer, at least this week, was ambiguous. What we are witnessing is, in effect, a subtle renegotiation of the social contract. One might say that citizens no longer accept "we'll fix it next week" as sufficient. The voice raised in the street is saying, "We will not wait indefinitely." The citizen wishes not just to vote, but to see the system respond in time. And there is the political dialectic. On one side, the leaders who cast themselves as reformers, change agents, bold visionaries. On the other, the institutional frameworks they must use, which are conservative by design, slow to shift. That tension is ever more plain. One might even say the architecture of government is meeting the impatience of social change and finding it lacking. For the moment, the United States stands in a place of suspended expectation. The shutdown may resolve tomorrow or linger. The nomination may succeed or yet subside. The No Kings marches may evolve into movement or dissipate. The future is not fixed, and that is the point. There is a deeper question beneath all of this. What is the nature of authority and its legitimacy in this moment? If vast swathes of government can halt or be blocked, what holds trust together? What replaces the assumption that public institutions simply will act? For many citizens, the answer is, we hold them accountable. We press them. We demand faster. And in doing so, we change the relationship. Thus, the week ends with a note of hope and of caution. Hope because the very fact of attendance, of protest, of visible concern shows people still believe in their stake. The No Kings protests were not just an outpouring of disquiet. They were a statement of intent. Caution because the trust that once quietly underpinned the system has become more visible and therefore more vulnerable. If I might close, as I would in a broadcast, keep your eyes open, and not just for the dramatic crescendo, the thunderclap of politics. Often what matters is the rustle of leaves, In this case, the incremental shifts in governance, the quiet erosion of expectation, the subtle rise of impatience. Because sometimes the next great turning begins not with fireworks, but with the wind shifting, barely noticed at first. So with that, we bid farewell to the week just past in the United States, and we look to the next, knowing that politics, after all, is not a spectator sport, but a public conversation, and one ever ongoing.